Welcome to the presentation on assessment fundamentals. These are some key components that are required to make sound eligibility decisions and use sound data in that process, meaning selecting the instruments that best measure your assessment questions and considering how those instruments weigh in the myriad of data that you have in decision making. As we know, sound data is needed for all types of eligibility decisions. To be able to make qualified decisions about sound data, some key foundational principles about assessment are important to understand. First, the same assessment tool can be used for different purposes. For example, progress data can be used to determine if a learner has a disability, but can also be used to identify what instructional strategies are most effective and therefore should be included as recommendations for meeting the learner's needs. Curriculum-based measurement can be used for both progress monitoring and screening. Second, the technical requirements for a tool are dependent on how it is used. That is, how much data you need, how reliable, the types of validity that apply are dependent on how the tool is used. For example, progress monitoring measures need to be very sensitive to change over time. We say they need to have good slope or gains of more than about 0.5 of whatever they're measuring per week. Whereas summative or screening measures need only be sensitive enough to see change over a much larger amount of time. So the purpose isn't inherent in the tool, but rather based on how the tool is used and what types of decisions are made with the tool. Let's take a look at the various purposes of assessment and how they're used within eligibility decisions. There are 4 key purposes of assessment and each has its place in eligibility decisions. We might have assessments that are better at screening versus progress monitoring, and we might have assessments that are good at both. It's the evaluator's responsibility to choose assessments and give those assessments more weight when they align to the purpose and have stronger technical requirements. Therefore, it's important to understand these 4 purposes of assessment when they're used in eligibility decisions and the technical requirements of tools used for these purposes. Good assessments are driven by good questions. We have 4 basic types of questions that are part of decision making. They're used at various places in eligibility decisions. The questions illustrate the kinds of decisions that are made. The key is that it's important to know what purpose you have when you look at the data or what decisions you're going to be making with the data. This will tell you the technical characteristics that the data needs and how to use the assessment. Think about the types of questions and decisions made in an eligibility decision. Some assessments are more and less suited for certain purposes. These 4 overlapping circles suggest that these are not always 4 independent functions, and oftentimes these assessments overlap. The first type of assessment that we're going to cover is universal screening tools. Universal screening tests are periodically conducted, usually 2 or 3 times during the school year, to identify children who may be at risk or predict children's likelihood of success on meeting or exceeding curricular targets. So their key features are that they're brief, repeatable, predictive of later outcomes. They're indicators and not comprehensive measures though. So when evaluating if a learner is meeting standards, we want to assure we have sufficient breadth when we choose assessments. I could be very discrepant on blurting out, and I might have a great measure of screening for this, but that alone doesn't suggest I'm discrepant on the standards that apply to all children within the area of behavior. So we would want to look at all of the standards that apply to that area of concern to assure that we've addressed the breadth of the decision effectively. It's important that screeners are efficient yet effective as possible in identifying children who may be at risk. The idea is to find a measure that gives the best predictive data possible, but these measures can also be used to aid in eligibility decisions. For example, we can answer questions about if the learner is discrepant from expectations, which is a discrepancy question. We can even use universal screening data to answer a progress question, such as is the learner progressing as expected based on fall to winter screening, since we have 2 points in time. We don't really know during that time what was beneficial if we had several things going on at different points, but we would have an overarching or an overall idea of progress. Diagnostic assessments are a process of learning which sub-skills or pre-skills a learner has mastered or not mastered. This information is used by teachers to decide how to most appropriately design or modify instructional activities. It aligns well with determining a learner's specific curricular or instructional needs. Because they're time intensive and they're very specific in nature, they are only used with that subset of children who really need them. For our students who are under evaluations for eligibility decisions, they are required. Diagnostic assessments need to be a flexible process and usually not just an off-the-shelf box test or a norm reference standardized kind of test. It could be, however, an off-the-shelf component of an assessment. For example, there are diagnostic assessments related to the Iowa Core foundational literacy skills that are readily available and well aligned to Iowa Core. However, other diagnostic assessments may require such methods as doing a task analysis or completing a brief experimental analysis to determine a learner's needs. Because diagnostic assessment is about identifying the nuances of the concern, it requires a great deal of knowledge about the performance domain, the standards that relate to all children around that performance domain, and the sub-skills that make up the expectations, as well as the tools then that can readily evaluate those skills. Here we can see that there are several types of questions that we can answer with diagnostic tools. And most of them relate to identifying a learner's needs, their instructional needs, their curricular needs, and their setting needs. Progress monitoring measures provide an indication of growth in the broad content areas. They do this by using a test that is sensitive to improvement. As we said, a measure that has good slope. Progress monitoring helps us gauge whether interventions are working or if a change is needed. Often clearly defined standardized procedures are also in place for progress monitoring. And if reliability is a concern about the measure, questions about the standardization might be one of the things to think about first. When sub-skills are the focus for monitoring, or when very small increments of changes in behaviors are needing to be monitored, mastery monitoring may be a better match. Technical adequacy of progress monitoring instruments for young children is sometimes difficult to achieve. Formative assessments are embedded classroom assessments. They include things like the small changes that a teacher does during instruction that are either planned or unplanned, but that really guide and impact the student's learning. So, for example, at the end of a guided practice, a teacher may provide independent practice, and if the skill is not demonstrated fluently at this point, the teacher could then add a fluency building strategy in to enhance the instruction. Formative assessments are key in the ongoing decisions of teachers, both general and special education. The last purpose for assessment is as an outcome or summative assessment. Summative assessments are designed to provide information regarding child, program, or school success at an end point in time. The results are used for purposes such as making an evaluation judgment about the effectiveness of recently conducted educational program, arriving at an inference about a child's mastery of the curricular aims, or determining whether a district met local, state, or federal accountability. Some of the possible questions that we can answer with outcome assessments that are related to eligibility evaluations include What percentage of our special education students are meeting expectations? As a special education program, we would want to have some idea if we're improving student outcomes. We could also look at what percentage of our school population is meeting expectations through general education. This question could aid in determining if appropriate instruction is in place across the school or grade, and help us in determining if a learner's disability is due to lack of appropriate instruction in that setting.